Hi everybody and welcome to the latest episode 3.
Episode 3, wow.
Of the History Show here on Lichfield Radio. Today you've got myself, John, and
me, Katie.
And we're from Lichfield Discovered, which is a bunch of enthusiastic, passionate history folk doing community heritage things with lots of other volunteers here in Lichfield. And we're very proud to be working with Lichfield Radio to bring you the History Show each week. So over the next half an hour, we're going to be discovering and exploring some more wonderful, fascinating myths, legends, buildings of Lichfield and the surrounding area. So, Katie, you're in the hot seat today.
I am going to be talking about magical house protection.
Magical house protection, which sounds like something straight out of Harry Potter.
It also sounds a bit niche, but I promise it's really interesting and something that's also quite accessible. It's a way that you can get out there and see kind of a hidden side of the city.
Because basically, the second half of the show, we're going to be setting everybody out on a kind of treasure hunt around to discover these fantastical things around there.
And I'm really hopeful that once people have heard the sort of things that I'm going to talk about, they might even be able to find examples in their own houses, buildings, businesses that we don't know about yet. Because I'm absolutely convinced that there's more out there that we don't know about.
Because it is absolutely fascinating. As hopefully everybody will discover, because it's all kind of quite spooky stuff.
It is quite spooky.
But it's really interesting bits of our architectural history, and it also gives us some pretty amazing kind of insights into how people felt about stuff.
Yeah, exactly. What were they worried about, and their fears and things like that. So it's a really nice link to people of the past, real people and the lives that they lived.
So half an hour of magical house protection, which sounds something straight out of the Hogwarts timetable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So do you want to explain to us just very briefly what do we mean by magical house protection?
Yeah, so I'm just going to start off by saying really I owe a lot here to a chap called Brian Hoggard. He came and did a talk for us last week, actually, just coincidentally. But he really is the expert on all this. So a lot of what I've gleaned over the last 12 years or so that I've been interested in it comes from him. And he's written, books and articles on it. But what we're talking about here are steps that people would take to protect their property against the dark forces of the world. So obviously we're looking back into the past where people believed in things like ghosts and spirits and demons and witches. And they wanted to take steps to protect their house or their property or their business from these dark entities. And that's what I'm going to be talking about because there was a different range of things that they could do. And as we said, we've got some examples of some here in Lichfield, not everything yet, but I am hopeful that there might be some out there. So I'm just going to be talking about some of the things that people would have done.
So the things that paste people did around their houses, around their buildings to kind of ward off evil spirits.
Evidence, and things that people have found that show us what people were doing to sort of counteract these concerns that they had.
Because the religion did play much more of a kind of part in people's everyday lives and spirituality and stuff like that than perhaps what it does now. But having said that, I guess there are kind of echoes of it have come all the way through.
Exactly that.
I'm thinking about the number of horseshoes that my nan and my granddad used to have. And always used to be the right way up and stuff like that.
Even my dad. So my dad was born in 1953. Hi, Dad, if you're listening. And, he still had this belief about things like don't put shoes on tape because it brings bad luck. His grandma said you shouldn't have your photo taken because it would steal your spirit. I'm talking about 20th century people here. I've still got horseshoes, I know I am a bit weird, but, I still salute magpies. I won't walk under a ladder. These rituals and beliefs have stayed with us and we still carry them on. We might not necessarily understand why we do them, but they are definitely an echo of what's gone before.
Yeah, just a few weeks back, how many people would have opened the front doors to let the new year in?
Absolutely, all of that kind of thing, yeah.
So all this kind of might sound a bit spooky, witchy and very long time ago, but actually there's very strong echoes in day-to-day stuff here. So, because I guess first question is, when are we talking about? When were people doing this stuff?
They don't know exactly when these things started. We've got examples, as I've said, carrying on into the 20th century. We're talking possibly medieval times, which links back nicely to what we talked about last week. But we're talking 16, 17, 1800s and beyond. There isn't really a start date for it. We know that some of the graffiti that I'm going to talk about in a bit is medieval. But yeah, we don't know exactly. We just know that these were carried out over a long period of time. There's a big amount of continuity with these rituals.
So medieval times all the way through.
Yeah.
So essentially, and because as we'll come to in the second half, and we're resisting the temptation to mention any Lichfield examples in the first half.
Spoilers.
We'll talk about Lichfieldian witch marks and marks of magical house protection later on. But you get them all over, don't you?
You do, yeah. So there are loads of examples from all over the country, and there are hotspots. As Brian said on his talk last week, the South East has got a lot of examples, as does Wales. The Welsh people there, I don't know, particularly superstitious or whatever. But I think as more and more people understand what these things are and what it is they're looking for, we're going to see a growth in reports from other areas as well.
And that is the thing, I guess, about this history show as well. Because we've put some examples of these things on our social media. So have a look so you can kind of actually see the type of stuff that Katie's talking about, and when you go out and go and find some of these examples in Lichfield.
Yeah.
But particularly if you live in some of the older buildings in Lichfield.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a look. And I think possibly as well, one of the things that's happened is builders, whoever hasn't really recognised what they found as something significant. It's just a bit of rubbish. It's just something a bit weird, and so possibly a lot of stuff has already gone and has not been recorded. A lot of what I found about Lichfield is stuff that's like just cropped up in a newspaper because it was a bit of a strange thing. Someone's found this. What on earth was it? Or word of mouth. But I think a lot of it has probably been lost. And I know for a fact that a lot of graffiti has been lost, not just here in Lichfield, but also when the Victorians, God bless them, did their renovations, should we call them?
They had a real issue with churches, didn't they?
They did, yeah. And, sandblasted. So I think we would have seen a lot more in churches. I was in Winchester. I said I was popping in for 5 minutes while my family went and did something else. I was there for 3 hours because there was just that much graffiti in there. I think we would have seen similar in Lichfield potentially, but there are only a few examples. But we will come on to that in a minute.
So we'll come to the Lichfield ones, but before we do that, so we're talking about things that marks that people made, scratches, marks, things people added to the houses. So give us some examples of the type of stuff we're talking about.
There are marks, but there are also physical objects as well. So you might have heard these referred to as witch marks. I'll start off on the symbols. Witch marks is a bit of a sort of misnomer, really, because they weren't just about keeping witches out. They were about keeping all sorts of dark forces, malevolent forces out. The sort of thing that people would have done then, something called daisy wheels, which basically looks like someone's been playing with a compass and has drawn a flower in a circle. But they are really, really common, and they appear in all sorts of places, religious buildings and secular buildings. Okay. Possibly something to do with evoking the sun. We don't know. There's also another really common kind of mark.
And I'm just going to say that's the one that, what's it called? There was that kids kind of play set where you can
spirograph, was it?
Spirograph. So it looks like spirograph.
A little bit like someone's had a spirograph out on a beam or something. Marian marks are also a really popular one that turns up all over the place. And obviously Marian relates to Mary, the Virgin. They look a little bit like a W. And there are some people who are very sceptical about this area of research because it is relatively a new area of investigation, So there are people who say, well, it's just a mark, it's just a W. It doesn't mean anything. Those marks there are just kids playing with a compass. But they are too common. And they are there's too many similarities between the sorts of places they're found in for them just to be someone who's messing around or just someone who's scratching their name into a wall. However, I would say that there potentially is something to do with names, but we'll come on to that in a little bit.
And of course, as a teaser for later on, if you were to find those two different types of marks right next to each other, not mention any places in Lichfield.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's another indication that it's...
Yeah, exactly. So that's another indication that this isn't just happening by chance. This has been a deliberate mark that's been made.
So what kind of other types of marks and additions and stuff have we got?
Okay, one of the most gruesome things that's found, I'm afraid, is a mummified cat. They turn up in places high up in the building, and they've been quite deliberately placed, quite possibly in the roof of somewhere. It's not just that a cat's got in there and then couldn't get out and, sadly passed away. These are objects that have been deliberately placed there. And Brian's theory about this is that cats, they've got 9 lives, they're associated with witches. They're kind of like a bit of a supernatural type creature. And the idea is that a dead one will look after you from the afterlife. So by placing them in your roof or whatever, they're protecting your property and they're prowling around, scaring off any horrible things that are trying to get in.
I've just got these visions of kind of some ye olde peasant in a Lichfield village. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
kind of building a new house.
Yeah, we've built the house. Where's the cats?
Whistling for Moggy and stuff.
Yeah.
Like that. But in all seriousness, it's got all kinds of this symbolism and kind of dead cats. There's almost Egyptian type stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Cats are a really, symbolic creature, aren't they? Horses are another one. So something else that turns
How do you
up.
put a horse under?
Not the whole horse, okay? Although somewhere in Lichfield there was a whole horse, which may or may not be symbolic, but more often than not, it was the skull of the horse that was placed in a protective capacity. In the foundations is quite often where these skulls turned up. Not just the one necessarily, there could be more than one. But the idea again is that horses are they've got some little bit of the night about them. Yeah, they can sleep standing up. They are a really loyal creature. And that by placing, again, one that has passed away, they're going to protect you from the other side. By placing the skull somewhere in your home is going to protect you from things that, live beyond the realm, if you like.
Wow.
Yeah.
God, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
So have we got any other examples of anything that
We do. One of the most common ones, and less gruesome than horses' skulls and mummified cats, are shoes, or I should say shoe, because generally it's only the one that's ever found. You don't generally tend to find them in a pair. Worn shoes, so these aren't, something new that's been brought and placed somewhere. These are shoes that have been worn by the owner, possibly, ready to be chucked away. But instead of chucking them away, people are putting them, or were putting them, again, in the attic, in up chimneys, in the foundations of buildings. And again, it's believed it's to protect the building from harm. So they're often placed, as are the cats, in vulnerable places. So the places where, if you were an evil force, you might try and enter someone's building, down the chimney, through the door, in the attic. So yeah, concealed shoes is a huge one. There was a list compiled by the museum in Northampton, and they've got thousands of examples of where these shoes have been found.
That's what I mean. This isn't a handful or shoe full of examples.
No, it's not like a couple of people.
There's one place in Norfolk where they put a shoe.
Yeah, exactly. It's across the country. It's thousands and thousands of examples. Probably more than that, because these are just ones that have been recorded, as we say.
So it might seem a bit out there, a bit spooky or whatever else, but actually what we're talking about is probably hundreds of thousands of our ancestors.
Exactly. This was an everyday thing.
Stuff on furniture, on doors, and whatever else to bring themselves keep out the evil spirits, which way you're looking at it.
Yeah, this wasn't just someone going, through a bit of a gothic teenage phase or something like that and thinking, I'm going to try a little bit of Wicca or whatever. This was something that people were doing on a regular basis. And it was all walks of society, because they're found in pubs, they're found in, quite humble dwellings, they're found in huge stately homes. This was a thing that everyone did.
So, talking about pubs, humble dwellings and things like that, we've cannily hit halfway of this episode 3 of the History Show. And as we promised, we've spoken about magical house protection and what form that took, but we've very, very carefully not mentioned any specific examples from Lichfield.
No.
So for the second half of the History Show, we are going to go on a history tour of the city and surrounding
magical
villages.
Mystery tour.
Magical history tour of Magic House
Magical
Protection.
history tour, that's better.
Of some of the examples, many of which people can actually go and see. So go on, start us off. Where are we going to see first?
Okay, so one of the things that I haven't mentioned, but is also a really common thing, is burn marks, ritual burn marks.
Oh, what are they?
So people think it's just where a light's been left, a candle's been left unattended and it's burnt the wood that it's been, placed upon. Somebody might think that it's a poke mark, but they're not. Again, they are deliberate marks, and people have tried this out. So this is like tried and tested. This isn't just even a theory. You have to make these marks in a very specific way over a certain amount of time. So this, again, isn't just a chance thing, or someone doing it on a whim. And the idea is, again, that you are creating a flame that burns in the dark recesses of the world that is going to protect you in one of the most vulnerable places in your building, which is the hearth, the fireplace, the chimney. And I'm really pleased to say that there are some fantastic examples at the Duke of York, which we know is Lichfield's oldest inn. Well, we don't know.
Or is it? We're going to come back to burn marks.
Yeah, that is a whole different podcast.
In 10 seconds, what is the fight, the debate?
Yeah, but basically, we've got the King's Head, we've got the Duke of York. They are both obviously very, very old. Which one is the oldest and why? Okay, so that is something we will come back to in the future. I mean, there's so many pubs around the country as well that claim to be the oldest this and whatever. Is there any grounds to it? We don't know, but yeah.
Jiggy York King's Head. Did it used to be called the Antelope?
It did used to be called the
Big
Antelope.
fight, who's the oldest? We'll sort that out another time.
We'll have a pub fight.
But marching back to the top of the hill, I'm Duke of York. So burn marks to the Duke
So
of
you
York.
go into the main bar and off to the right, there's a lovely fire, which on a night like this would be absolutely perfect. But if you look on the mantle above it, you can see scores of these things, scores of these burn marks that would have been deliberately made. So that's the first stop on our little tour. Second place that you can go and see these marks in, the marks that I mentioned previously, Samuel Johnson's Birthplace Museum, amazingly. I mean, whether this mark was there in Samuel's time is another question that we'll probably never be able to answer. But on a vertical beam outside the dictionary room, there is an absolutely beautiful example of one of the daisy wheels that I've been talking about. So
and these are so deliberate. And they're so carefully
this isn't little Samuel having a play around with, a compass. This is something that someone's deliberately done. I mean, of course, potentially those beams could have come from a different build. I mean, there's that kind of angle, I suppose, to look at it as well. Same with the Duke of York. I'm assuming that, those beams and whatever came from that building. But, it's a beautiful example. There's also a really faint example on the south door of Lichfield Cathedral. You really have to look for it. I've seen it and found it, and I keep losing it. So every time I go back, I have to re-find it again. It's really faint. It's almost not there. It's almost a ghost of a mark. But it just shows.
And that's a really interesting one because it's ended up on the cathedral.
Absolutely.
Also a very, very prominent door in the cathedral.
Yeah, exactly. So this, again, is something, this is something that the church, I believe, either knew about or kind of turned a blind eye to it, because churches are where you find a lot of these marks. This isn't something people are just doing in their homes. They are all over churches. And as I said at the start, they would have been, I think, all over churches even more had it not been for the Victorians getting rid of them. I did find a reference in Old Elford about the vicar there scrubbing away graffiti. Didn't specify what kind of graffiti. I mean, we could, it could be names or anything like that as well, which we often see. But there was definitely graffiti there and he's got rid of it. So I think there would have been more, and just little fragments are left here.
Because, of course, the cathedral did get kind of thoroughly restored and overhauled in the 19th century, didn't it?
Several times, really, wasn't it?
I'm just trying to think back to Brian's talk, because I got there late, but I think one of the things he was talking about was almost those little dashes that you see in churches and cathedrals and stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the past they've been described as being for sharpening arrows and stuff like that, which is a huge
that's
myth,
a huge.
isn't it?
I mean, you look at any church guidebook and they will tell you that those grooves are from people sharpening their arrows.
Behind a very, very big famous battle that everybody's heard of.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just not, it doesn't work. You wouldn't use it for that. It doesn't make any sense. So the kind of current thinking, if you like, is that people would go in and almost like take a bit of the building. It was something that they could sort of scrape a little bit off and then maybe go and take it home and create some sort of potion for healing if somebody at home was poorly or something like that. And that then has echoes of St. Chad, because we know that people came to St. Chad's tomb and sort of did the same. They would put their hands into his tomb and take little bits of dust out, and then they would take those back and I don't know what they'd mix it with or whatever, but they'd take it home and use it as a sort of potion.
Okay.
To try and use as, to try and heal themselves or somebody else.
So we've got these wheels on what used to be the big main door to the cathedral facing the city. Where are we off to next?
So the next place is the Angel Croft Hotel. This was a really interesting one because I went for a little round when it wasn't the beautiful place that it is now. It was just when Friels had first got it, and they invited me to have a little look around, and it was derelict.
This is just at the bottom end of Beacon Street.
This is at the bottom end of, so when we were talking about last time about where the West Gate was, this is almost opposite there. So it's been beautifully renovated now. It was previously a hotel, and prior to that it was a wine merchant's house. But when they were renovating it, they found a mismatched pair of old boots somewhere where you wouldn't expect to find a pair of boots. Okay. And when I was going around, they were showing me some of the things, and there was an old newspaper and one thing and another, and they showed me a picture of these boots. And I said, were they hidden somewhere? And the lady that was showing me around said, yeah, they were. And I said, I bet you that they are an example of concealed shoes. And it makes sense. Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. Where they found it, the age of the building, the state of the shoes. I mean, these shoes have been worn, and they're not a pair, which is really interesting as well. There's a bigger shoe and a smaller shoe. So yeah, they're normally found, singularly, but somebody's put a mismatched pair of shoes that have been really well worn somewhere in a building.
Am I right? I think you got outlines of shoes and feet and hands and
You
stuff
do,
like
yeah.
that
So
as
this is another thing. So there's some fantastic examples. I was lucky enough to go up on the Guildhall. And Clive, who, invited me up there, said, we found this outline of a shoe up there. And again, this is the same sort of mark that we're talking about. Shoes, boots, they're all symbolic of getting rid of demons and the devil and things like that. And then you've also got this idea of a hand. And there's an absolutely beautiful example as you go into Longden Church. On the south porch of Longden Church, there is what is known as the bride's hand, because I think what's happened is someone's carved it as an apotropaic, and I love that word, it makes me sound clever when I say it, but it means averting evil. Someone's carved it as an example of that on the door to keep out bad spirits, evil, whatever it is that they're trying to keep out. And over the years, it's become a bit of a folklore thing. And the thing with it now is that brides place their hand against it, and it's supposed to bring them luck and fertility. So it's still got this kind of ritualistic, it has evolved slightly, but I think originally it would have been one of these marks to keep out, because we've seen them in other places. In Eccleshall, where obviously the bishops of Lichfield were based, one of the bishop's tombs has got these hands on it. There's hands in Abbots Bromley Church. And this is how I think we know that it isn't just, somebody randomly drew it. Yeah, exactly.
Well. Yeah.
These aren't just one-off examples. These are repeated everywhere across the country.
Because one of the things I was just going to come back to as well, in terms of the potential for us potentially finding shed loads more of these.
Yeah.
Which is partly, if everybody's listening, following our social media, and go out and have a look at them.
Yeah, please go and look at your beams now.
But also, and because our recent, the last history show that we did was all about kind of medieval Lichfield, and we talked about the streets surviving and that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I don't think we had time to talk about was actually buildings that are surviving from medieval times.
No.
And that is extraordinary in Lichfield.
It is, because people have got this kind of idea of it being this Georgian city, which it is. But as in any place, there are layers and layers. And actually what you think might be a Georgian building quite often has a medieval core to it.
Because there's been a few examples that people have known about where they've seen old beams and stuff like that. We're rapidly finding more and more of them.
Yeah.
So a big shout out to kind of our friends and kind of archaeological mates and architectural historians who have been helping us out. Because in short, we're starting to find more and more buildings in Lichfield that aren't just sat on that medieval street layout.
Yeah.
But exactly as you said, basically the Georgians have spruced them up a bit.
Yeah.
Or they've given a new front, or they've rebuilt the front wall and stuff like that.
But behind it.
But when you start looking at the actual timbers and the frames and the foundations and the structures, they're going back centuries into medieval times.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say where it is because we haven't shared the news yet. But there's one particular restaurant in the centre of Lichfield, where it's got beautiful beams.
It's absolutely
and like
beautiful.
I said, we've been chatting to kind of architectural historians, and they let us in early one Sunday to have a look around in peace and quiet when it wasn't packed with people eating and drinking. And we think that might go all the way back to the 1300s, that building, and might be the oldest secular, i.e. non-religious building in the whole of Lichfield. But having said that, based on the rate at which these buildings are turning up, I wouldn't be surprised if there's dozens of buildings out there that might go back to medieval times. But what that also means is there could be dozens of examples which have got these marks.
Yeah, and I think, places as well that are less frequented in terms of that, so your attics, your cellars, places like that are really the place to look because A, they're quite vulnerable, and B, that's where quite often the renovations stop. We do these nice kind of facades and, we spruce up the bit of the building that the public see or people see, but actually the attic, we don't go up there. So, there's a house as you go towards the cathedral from Beacon Street, and it's just got layers and layers and layers of wallpaper up there. It's absolutely fascinating, so a medieval house, and then you've got these layers going, because no one ever went up there, we don't need to make it nice and tidy. So you really get a sense of the history while you're up there.
Speaking of being up there, I've just remembered somebody grabbed me after the night with Brian talking about the cathedral spire as well.
Yeah.
And about these marks being up there.
Yeah, there are some marks. Yes. I mean, there's definitely Mason's marks up there. We know that. So, and this is, I think, again, where people have got confused in the past and why this is a relatively new study. People would just put any kind of mark down to a Mason mark. And we know Masons made a mark on some of the stonework that they worked on to identify it as what they'd worked on. But these marks are something different and above and beyond that.
So, last stop on our crazy tour of magical house protection in Lichfield. My favourite, because I'm totally biased.
Go on then.
The old grammar school.
The old grammar school.
So if people don't know this, as we've mentioned quite a few times, we're all part of a group called Lichfield Discovered, which is a community group of heritage volunteers, if you like, doing Lichfield history. And we've recently taken on large parts of the old grammar school on St. John Street, which are opening up on a regular basis for events, people to pop in, place for people to kind of make history, if you like. And we got a bit of a surprise, didn't we?
We did. And I mean, this is like a dream come true for a weirdo like me. So upstairs, which we are hoping to be able to show people soon, but we can't at the minute. But if you go up the spiral staircase, what you've got are some attic bedrooms, and they would have been dormitories when that was used as the old grammar school, the master's house.
And they've got various initials,
They've
dates.
got initials, they've got dates. So we know some of those doors have got 1715 on them. So we know they're going back, a couple of centuries. But even more exciting than that for me is that I think there's at least 2 examples of a daisy wheel up there. I have emailed Brian with them and he said, yeah, I think potentially as well. I mean, it's wow. There's also a Marion mark up there. And again, like you said earlier, finding these 2 marks together.
Well, I must admit, because this was the thing for me, is because when you showed me those daisy wheels, and I was thinking, wait, this is where school kids...
Yeah, and I know, that's the thing.
That's blatantly a kid messing around with a compass. I'm pretty sure you probably did the same thing very long time ago on school desks and stuff like that. But like you said, you've got these kind of daisy wheels, and then just on the door opposite, you've got this really distinctive kind of inverted W2Vs, which is the other type of mark.
Yeah, and it's just isolated. It's not part of someone's name. It's not like William was here. It's just an isolated mark. And then you've got these couple of daisy wheels alongside it. So I'm convinced that that's what it is. What they were trying to keep out is another question.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. So no, it is absolutely fascinating.
That's been really interesting.
Yeah, and I just would really love people just to go and have a look at these marks. And like I said, if ever the problem is, don't get like me. So if ever you go out with your family, you disappear for half an hour when you're supposed to be going to the toilet because you've gone to look and see if there's anything on the beam that you spotted as you were coming up the stairs.
But if you've got an old house that might be an even older house than you think, do have a look, see if you spot anything, and do let us know. And like I said, when I heard you guys first talking about this stuff, I must admit it was kind of like, oh, this is kind of like really niche and a bit weird.
This is a bit weird and niche.
But like say, coming back to that thing that we said at the start, this was really common. The marks we've been talking about, but also sticking the animals in your chimney and putting the boots in your chimney. This is what millions probably of people were doing in their houses all over the country and further afield. So it's not just some kind of niche thing.
No.
And for me, that idea of so many people, so many of our ancestors doing this, it's a big part of their life. It kind of sums up their relationship with spirituality. It's a really big thing in this country.
It absolutely is, yeah. And people really did believe in magic. I mean, Elias Ashmole, another contender for a podcast one day, who, was born by St. Mary's Church. He was a big believer in magic. He once said that he spoke to a piper in Lichfield who told him where all the fairy houses were in Lichfield.
And he meant it.
He didn't, unfortunately, tell us where they were. But yeah, he absolutely meant it. People absolutely believed in this stuff. And I understand why people are cynical. None of us are saying we believe in it now, but what we are saying is that people did back then, and look, there's evidence of it. And it's absolutely fascinating.
It was a different world, and it's a different way people saw the world and what they believed in.
Absolutely that.
Oh, good. So we've done a mad tour. It's been very exciting and interesting. So thank you very, very much.
My pleasure.
Can't remember what our next episode is, but we're going to have the whole of the Lichfield Discovered crew with us for the next history show, I think. So please do listen in again soon. And thank you again for listening.
Thanks for listening.
This episode. Cheers. Thank you.